Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from Chase Commercial Term Lending and New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Capital One Bank, the Wyckoff Group, Genova Burns, Gian Tomasi Webster, Greenberg Traurig. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman and Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Fisher Brothers, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Foley and Lardner, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, HAP Investment Developers, Herrick Feinstein, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, John Katsimides, Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knuckle Realty Services, Matone Group, Mercantile Commerce Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, MHP Real Estate Services, People's United Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling National Bank, Sterling Risk, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, The Continuum Company, CUNY TV Foundation, the Moynihan Group, Urban American, and These Friends.
I want to go shopping. Everybody wants to go shopping. That's what happens. Everybody wants to go buy something. They want to go shopping. Or maybe they want to go to the bank. They want to run around. Every part of the city, all over, people are shopping. The economy's good. So today, I've assembled this group of individuals who understand retail better than anyone else, I hope. My guests today include Richard Wagman, who is the managing member and founder of Madison Capital. Joanne Podell, who is the vice chair, they should call her vice chairperson.
You're right.
Of Cushman and Wakefield. Bruce Schanzer, who is the president and CEO of Cedar Realty Trust. And last but definitely not least, Chris Conlon, who is the COO and executive vice president of Acadia Realty Trust.
Still going to say Arcadia, huh?
Right. Acadia.
Okay.
I said. So you were in urban retail, but then you went into Soho. He's in Soho. You're basically a
up and down East Coast
suburban strip shopping center with supermarket anchored, and you're the queen of New York City retail realty, understanding it. How's the market, Joanne?
It's very strong. We're all so enthusiastic because not only is it strong, but the retailers are doing well. You know, it's one thing to present great product and offer it to your tenants or represent great landlords, as I'm fortunate enough to do. But when you see that that the retailers can do the business, that's what's really so good about it. That's the package.
You know, you have a variety of markets that you're in. You're in New York City, you're in Florida, you're in Georgetown, you're in Chicago. Those are
A little bit up in Boston, yeah.
Right, but those are your major markets. Who wants to come to this market? What new companies? Do we have more Uniglos coming out of the
I'll tell you what we think that what we see is interesting, which to expand on what Joanne had said, which is not only are you seeing great local tenants that want to expand here in New York, you're seeing new national tenants, great companies like Target that want to open up new formats just to be here in New York City. And so that's another great phenomena. So it's not just the locals and the regionals, but it's new national companies everyday names, people like Target, people like Walmart,
Was
that want to
that-
be
was
right
that a
here.
lead in for Target? I mean,
He's setting me up for City Point.
so,
right?
so let's talk
Exactly.
about
So City
you know,
Point is our development in Brooklyn where Target, to Richard's point, Target is going to open up a City Target store. It'll be the first in New York.
Now, what is the City Target store?
So it's their urban format, so it's a little bit smaller. Their suburban format is about 135 to 150,000 square feet. The store that they'll open up with us in Brooklyn will be, the sales floor will be about 110,000 square feet, and then they'll have about 20,000 square feet for storage, stock. So that's very different for Target.
Will it have the groceries?
It'll have food, but it won't have a full grocery component.
Do you see more of that happening, Joanne?
Well, I think what's interesting is the big box users are looking at urban retail and saying to themselves, we want to be part of this. And so they, in order to be able to facilitate that, it's critical that they change their product mix and try and find a way to, scale down the size of the stores. It's very complicated for them because they're so big and they have so many stores already.
And the great retailers adapt. So people like Whole Foods, you've
Correct.
seen them do that in places
But that,
like Columbus
Correct.
Circle.
No,
but
but
I'm going to.
yes.
Relating to Whole Foods, I think a very good example of Whole Foods is when Whole Foods opened up on 57th Street. They're packed all the time, but it's only a 37,000 square foot store. But they're accommodating. They're moving their business very.
They're just a great retailer, and you're seeing that from other retailers, people like TJ Maxx, Marshalls, and then you have other retailers that are here in New York that are looking to expand, people like Saks, looking at new off-Saks locations around New York. These are just smart retailers willing to adapt in order to get market share.
Bruce, do you see some of
I was
those?
actually going to amplify that exact idea. Yeah, our markets are up and down the East Coast. We're D.C., Philly, New York, and Boston. So generally speaking, high density markets, not necessarily as dense as New York. And what we're seeing is exactly the same phenomenon. So we're seeing retailers who are being flexible. It's just hard to get space. There is definitely a supply constraint in the retail markets in general in these cities. So we're seeing retailers.
Are we saying, is it a landlord's world today?
I
mean,
I'd say it's certainly becoming more of that. I mean, certainly in New York, it's amplified, but in general, there's just so little new supply that we're certainly having retailers who, we had discussions with, who perhaps said, look, we're going to, keep our options open. We're not coming back to us on centers that we're surprised to be engaging with them on because there's just so little new supply that, we're able to make deals that perhaps 2 years ago wouldn't have been options for these retailers.
In New York City and in Boston and in Chicago, where I spent a lot of my time, certainly in Miami and DC as well, there's a fair amount of construction going on. As soon as you get outside those cities, there's not a lot of retail construction. So I think to Bruce's point, not a lot of new supply. There's almost zero development out in the suburbs. So there's all these great suburban retailers that are looking for expansion. They have stated expansion goals that they can't execute. So they're looking at existing properties, that's serving you very, very well. I think at Bruce's point, 3 years ago they came and they said, no, that might not be for us, but now they're saying, well, this really needs to be for us because we need the growth.
So
See, that's right, because with that lack of inventory, it also brings them into Manhattan, into other urban markets, because they're looking at it and saying, let me modify. I know that I can do the business here.
Well, I think the other
And
thing
that's what's so helpful.
the other thing that we can't miss is that in Chicago, in New York, in DC, in Miami, and certain other cities, a big driver of the success of the retail story is tourism.
Yeah.
Right.
Tourism is driving a huge piece of it. So down in Miami, you can walk down Lincoln Road and you can hear Portuguese, French, German, all sorts of South American
Have you walked on
variations.
Fifth Avenue on a
and
Sunday?
exactly.
Same stuff, right?
You see on
Incredible.
Fifth, and you
So-
see it in Chicago.
Absolutely.
You see it in North Michigan.
Absolutely.
You see it on
we
South
don't see
State
that
Street.
in Soho. We don't.
We do.
Oh, it's all
Soho,
over.
sure.
It's
Yeah.
really, tourism is a big driver, and we're definitely seeing retailers that want to take advantage of where the tourism is. Having said that, it's also a risk today, right? So who knows what some of the global events, what kind of impact that's going to have on tourism. And with the appreciation of the US dollar against other currencies, what kind of risk does that leave for retailers that want to be here because of tourism?
You know,
There's even a bigger, to take a slightly different tack, I don't think it's exclusively tourism. In fact, I think tourism is almost the marginal demand driver. When you look at just the growing urbanization of our population, right? You just have so many people who are getting married later. So many young people are moving into cities because that's really where they want to live. They want to be near their work. I mean, a great illustration is in Philadelphia, where we have a real presence. We just made a big investment down there in a neighborhood that seems to be sort of a relatively modest working class neighborhood. In fact, if you get more granular, you see waves of students who are graduating from the Philadelphia colleges who are literally moving into these row houses with their friends, and they commute up to Center City, and that's just a phenomenon that's occurring in cities like Philly and New York and Boston and DC that I think certainly supports the
It's the millennials.
the tourism.
By 2020, the millennials will be taking over.
I hear these markets. I haven't heard, and it's just the Garden State. I haven't heard these positive comments from you with regard to certain parts of the New Jersey. Well, what's your thoughts about it? And I'm going to be specific on New Jersey. I'm going to go to the market of Newark, where they're going to be building. They are building a Whole Foods. And Newark, I've done a number of shows on New Jersey last season, and the general comment from everyone, from the bankers on, is that even though there's population, good transportation, people needing housing, nothing's happening.
It's safety. I think it's the safety.
Well, I think New Jersey's got a lot of flavors, right? So one of the flavors
Bergen County is
well, that's one flavor, but the other flavor is the whole Jersey City, West New York, Hoboken area, which is thriving, and there's a lot of retail demand down there. It may not be Target and Whole Foods and a lot of the other names that we're using this afternoon, but there's a lot of retail demand. Now, when you go out further west into the state, I do think it gets quiet in certain markets. But you mentioned Bergen County and Paramus. Paramus is a world-class retail market, like it is in Westbury, like it is in Yonkers and Scarsdale. Around, when you look at those areas around the New York metropolitan area, those are some of the best retail markets in the country, and that doesn't change. So New Jersey, now when you get further south, when you get further west, it's a little bit of a different story. It's a little quieter. The tenant demand is not quite what it is close into the city, but New Jersey's doing quite well in that regard.
Broadly speaking, the population breaks down into that component of the population that is sort of commutable to New York, and that part of the population is commutable to Philly. And that's broadly how New Jersey lays out. And so in many respects, New Jersey's health is really a function of the health of those.
I have three owners over here, and one of the items which is taking place in parts of New Jersey, heavily in Morristown or places near trains, and it's also taking place in Huntington and in other sections of Long Island, is transit-oriented development, where you have retail downstairs and you have residential upstairs, because the transportation is the key to get people into New York City or so on.
Transportation is a key even in the urban
It's in the
markets.
city. It's also
I agree,
urban
but I'm
markets.
asking your opinion as owners. Have you evaluated the suburban, the TOD type of locations?
We're in the middle of one right now on Route 110 in you mentioned Huntington. So it's the Farmingdale, Huntington Carter, Route 110, big office market, a lot of industrial around there. And the state, through the Long Island Railroad, is considering reopening a rail station in East Farmingdale and helping activate a whole retail Sparker retail development, which is started by Kimco, owns the center there already. We own the land across the street, and we would like to develop that land. And we're doing it in connection with and in discussions with the state and the local agencies to see if we can coordinate that. So there's something to it, but I think Richard hit the nail on the head. Even when you're looking at the best spots in Manhattan or Brooklyn or Queens, where's the subway station? It's all about transit.
Imperative.
That's a big driver of the.
So we're seeing it from retailers as well. We bought a site that we're fortunate enough to work with Joanne on. We bought a site from the MTA on Houston Street and Broadway. This is right above one of the top 3 busiest stations in New York City. And so when we say that to retailers, it's amazing to hear their feedback and what they want to hear, what they want to see from commuters coming into New York or commuters coming around New York, tourists, residents, commuters, everyone. And that's the opportunity, is to be next to these great transportation hubs.
So are we talking Ridgewood in Queens? Are we talking, something going further, going into the markets, into Bushwick?
I think anywhere where the trains can get to, where the subways can get to, where there be stations. Some stations will be much busier than others, and those are the ones that we watch, and we try to look for opportunities around them. But anywhere where the trains can get to, there's a chance for retail development and retail proliferation.
One of the newest retail developments under development in the city of New York, in the borough of Staten Island, which has always been hindered because of the, first of all, $15 toll and the transportation. The comment is the first factory outlet is being built over there next to the wheel. How do you see Staten Island as a retail destination?
So Staten Island is roughly 400,000 people who live on the island. That's your market. The thought that folks are going to come over from Woodbridge to the southwest or from Brooklyn to the northeast, I think Staten Island is a fine market. There's a mall right in the middle of it. It's owned by GGP. It's a very successful mall.
But you believe it's going to be the people who live and work on Staten Island as opposed to commuters over there?
Outlet is the one thing that may draw people over, excuse me, from New York over to shop because it's that different. But traditional retail has to survive on Staten Island itself.
And it's going to have critical mass. We're not talking about a few outlet stores.
Oh, no, yeah, very good point. There's also one planned for the Bronx, up on the old Whitestone Cinema site. So it's interesting that outlet business is coming closer into the city, closer into the department stores, because historically the department stores have said, you build your outlet centers in Riverhead and up in Woodbury, New York, outside the city, but now they're getting in close. So that's going to change things. And the retailers are adapting too. On Fulton Street in New York, there's a Banana Republic factory store, and there's a Gap factory store. There's also a Gap factory store up in the Bronx. So the retailers are trying factory or outlet concepts in traditional retail markets. So there's this sort of merging of that.
What other trends are we seeing? A number of months ago, I did a show called Emerging Trends in Retail, and I had Chopped On, I had SoulCycle, I had SoulCycle Blink, I had the Equinox people on, and then I had City MD. Do we see more of that? I mean, I noticed that you may have seen it, Bruce, last week, I think it was in Long Island Business News, about the IDA funding at the former Fortunoff that they're going to build a 120,000 square foot lifestyle center. Are we seeing more health clubs? Are we seeing a change in there? I mean, are banks, with the exception of TD and others?
I think it's a function of the demographic and the way that it's changing. The millennials, they care more about themselves. They're more involved with health-related activities. They're looking at leisure differently than we are.
Do you think we're going to see more juice bars?
Yeah.
And it's good because you get this great mix of retailers that come into a street front where you get food and you'll get fashion, and they could all mix with each other. And we've seen this on Fifth Avenue, right, where you've seen some of the big fast fashion companies, people like Zara and Uniglo, open up alongside Ferragamo and Gucci. And that's what makes it an interesting urban fabric. And so you'll continue to see this on different
I remember
streets.
a number of years ago, Joanne was kind enough to bring somebody from Benetton on the show. And, Benetton was a fad. There were a number of stores. We don't see, it's like the Starbucks of clothing. Do we see any of those foreign retailers, as Chris was talking about, the smaller Target? Do we see a smaller Uniglo? Do we see?
You already are.
We do. We saw Primark just signed their first lease in the U.S. in Boston. I had an unbelievable. I had the good fortune of visiting with them and with their management team in London, and I have to say that I was beyond. I think that in terms of a generation of store, they're the best I've seen in 10 years.
But I think Uniqlo is already adapting too to the U.S. market. The new Uniqlo stores that are being talked about are 10 to 20,000 square feet, not 30 to 50,000 square feet. Now, they announced a deal on North Michigan Avenue in Chicago, across from your property, and right down the street from ours. Big store. So they'll do those flagship stores, sort of.
But they'll still have the satellite stores.
Hub and spoke kind of a thesis. So I think Uniqlo will continue to do some big stores, but I think the vast majority of their unit growth will be that 10 to 20, 10 to 50.
But we've also seen smaller retailers. So we recently signed a lease with a Brazilian company, a Brazilian fashion company called Aquamar down in Soho. So you're definitely seeing other foreign retailers. Sandro Mage has expanded all over New York and has done a great job. There are other retailers.
For those types of retailers. In other words, when you think about, it sort of came to mind when you brought up the health.
No. You bring up a very interesting point. In one of my roles advising a bank who you met, they had shown me a transaction up in in the Chelsea area, and it was a no-name Italian company who really had no credit, maybe in the linen business, and I was a little cautious because of the credit, and the bank subsequently did not want to do the deal.
One of the things we see is, with health clubs, for example, which we see as a very good tenant in the sense that when you look at the impact of e-commerce on retailing, certainly you can't work out on the internet, so obviously those are going to be good long-term tenant prospects, and yet when you think about it from a credit perspective, health clubs really fall into almost two distinct categories.
Fitness
you have those that really are solid and durable credits, and then you have some that it's just a matter of time out before they blow out.
Something I was going to pose. Amazon goods, Amazon, the e-commerce, the Fresh Direct, the Google shopping. What effect has that had on the retail business in general today?
Significant.
I could comment on the grocery piece. I'll let others comment on the other soft good retailers. On the grocery side, it's certainly an interesting idea, and conceptually it should be a real threat. It's a very small part of the grocery business, and with the exception of Amazon that doesn't mind going into businesses where they lose money.
Correct.
The challenge in the grocery business is such a thin margin business.
See, but Fresh Direct has turned around. I think they've reached the market, but they have a niche market. They go.
You really have to focus on the only way to do it, and it's interesting. We had looked when I first started at Cedar 3 years ago. We had looked at where companies were doing grocery businesses, and it was generally in more affluent markets as opposed to in more dense markets. And what we learned is that when you look at the typical basket that people are ordering, they're somewhat indifferent. Obviously, this is a generalization, but they're somewhat indifferent when it comes to that incremental delivery cost. And so you're really looking at people who are willing to pay a little bit more in order to have their groceries delivered. That doesn't describe the vast majority of the population of the United States.
Could we utilize that in the same way that somebody who's going to a Costco is paying a membership fee? Is there a different situation on that?
I think what's happened in the grocery business, and Bruce and I have spent a lot of time talking about this, is it's getting picked apart. So some of their business, their traditional business, growing up, my mother would take us to the grocery store once a week, and then we'd load up. I come up from a family of 4 boys, so we ate a lot. And 2 giant baskets, and we bought everything once a week, and you bring it home. But now, you're going to buy some of your stuff at the grocery store. You're going to buy some of your stuff at the drugstore. You're going to buy some of your stuff at Target or Walmart. You're going to buy some of your stuff at BJ's and Costco. And you're going to buy some of your stuff on the internet, especially the younger folks. So their business has been picked apart. And those in the supermarket business that are doing a great job of differentiating themselves and being different or providing a different experience are Fairway and Wagmans and Whole Foods. Certain ShopRite divisions are doing a really, really good job of it. And then there are other supermarkets that are having a hard time adapting. And our good friends at A&P and Pathmark are having a heck of a time adapting and becoming more special and more unique because their business has been picked apart by gas stations and drugstores and convenience stores.
Look at it this way. You remember when there was Rickle Home Center and there was Handy Dandy. I mean, there are no more small hardware stores.
Okay, but you have very good companies that have taken their place. People like Lowe's and people like Home Depot.
And companies like Sherwin-Williams and Ace Hardware, which still provide a tremendous function.
We have and still open brick and mortar stores.
Absolutely. So back to your point about the internet, we can't give up the opportunity to talk about Staples. Staples is the 2nd largest online retailer in the world, behind Amazon. They're doing a great job, getting beat up along the way, but I'm a big bettor on Staples. As they adjust their business more towards an online business, their brick and mortar piece of their overall business strategy is absolutely critical to their execution. So their stores are going from 24,000 square feet to 12, maybe 10, maybe smaller one day. But the stores are a critical piece. That matching, that merging of both strategies is critical to their execution.
So now I ask you about what happens with the bookstores. I just finished reading Jeff Bezos' life story, and
the Everything Store, is that what you're referring to?
Right. So we have one book chain left to speak of, right? We have Barnes & Noble.
For now.
For now. Do we see, would you take a credit of doing a Barnes & Noble lease today?
Look, I think more generally, retail is Darwinian. It's just the way it is.
I agree.
And you're going to just see an evolution in all retailing, right? Like you were talking about all these companies that no longer exist. And I'm not saying that Barnes & Noble will no longer exist, although it seems to be challenged right now. But what you see in, whether it's in the supermarket space or in a lot of these other retailers, right, those who are nimble and those who are aggressive, those who are forward-looking and well-managed, they're careful with their balance sheets and they're very disciplined on the operating side. They do well and they survive.
Look, we really only have one electronics chain left nationally, Best Buy. There's no more Circuit City.
But you have very strong regional players. PC Richard in this market is a very solid company.
You have to understand something else also about these retailers. What's happened is their number one store in terms of sales are their internet stores. So Best Buy's number one store in the country might have used to been on maybe 86 and Lexington Avenue,
right,
is the internet today. Neiman Marcus's number one store is online, right? And so each of these retailers have big presence online, and that's become a real focus for them. So now they have to figure out how do they differentiate in their brick and mortar stores. And that's become very difficult for them.
Well, the other
and
thing
by
is
the way,
that
they're doing it. I'm sorry, but you know they are. You know what they're doing? Every retailer that I work with, part of their program is how they incorporate the internet in the store. Not just out of the store, but in the store. You can go to a Nike on 57th Street and you can order, if they don't have the sneaker you want, you could order it right there on a touch screen. It's not unusual to see the retailers looking to embrace the internet within their brick and mortar as well as separate.
It just goes back to the earlier point that I made, which is just that the best run companies will figure out a way to leverage technology to gain market share on their competition, and that's true in virtually every vertical. You know, because of the nature of the world that we're in right now, where it's so thin margin and so Darwinian, right? You are seeing things like one bookstore, one electronics retailer. It's very hard to survive.
Comment, because we have very short time left. Banks. Many people today don't go to banks because they have scanning. All of the scanning devices. Most people, you know, do you see less banks being created?
Well, the banks are telling us that there'll be less branches and the branches will be smaller, and in the branches there'll be less people. You know, we went through a portfolio review with a very large bank who provides very beautiful cups, and they told us that there'll be less branches and there'll be less people, and they showed us all these kiosk functions, and they said that right up to certified checks will be done through a kiosk system. So the brick and mortar piece of banking is not going to go away.
Yeah.
It is going to evolve, and it's likely going to shrink.
They're going to have to make a difference with those stores, and that might mean they have to be careful and they have to select the right stores. But places like New York and Boston and Chicago, these urban markets, they will always want to be in these markets, and they want to have a significant presence.
But we can't forget that, you know, my kids are older teenagers, 17 and 19. They don't go into banks.
No. I really think that this interesting crew has given us some nice, interesting perspectives on the state of retail. And I hope in my 14th season that all of you will return later on for joining me.
Pleasure.
I'd like to thank Richard, Joanne.
Thank you very much.
Bruce, and Chris. See you next week.
Thanks.